Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Double check for missing income forms W-2 1099 before filing taxes. IR 2021-33, February 9th, 2021, Washington. With some areas seeing mail delays, the Internal Revenue Service reminds taxpayers to double check to make sure they have all their tax documents, including forms W-2 and 1099, before filing a tax return. So they're saying there may be some mail delays due to the social distancing and whatnot. And if there are mail delays, we might have some delays with the documentation that you may need for your taxes, which would include the W-2 forms and the 1099 forms. Remember that these forms are going to be sent not only to you, but also to the IRS. So when you're preparing your taxes, you want to make sure you have all that documentation so that you can include it on the tax return so that it'll match what's in on the IRS's side as well, so that you don't have any basically delays or problems with processing the return and hopefully getting a refund. Remember that the form W-2 will of course be an employer type of form, so you would be an employer sending you then a W-2 form. It goes not only to you but also to the IRS. Various amounts of 1099 forms or various types of 1099 forms also could be sent out, and those 1099 forms, remember, could possibly be something that you need to be including then in income. So you might want to make sure that you have all of them. Again, noting that the 1099 forms that come to you also are going to the IRS. Some people may be getting 1099 forms this year that they're not used to getting in prior years, including 1099s for unemployment, which is something that you'll typically need to be including in income as well. So if you had any unemployment benefits, you want to make sure that you have the documentation related to that. If you started a new business or something like that for a Schedule C type business, possibly picking up gig work or something like that, then you got to report that income as well. You may get a 1099 related to it, and you got to make sure that you report that on, say, like a Schedule C or something like that, because if you do not, the 1099, once again, going to you and to the IRS having the income side of it, not then the expense side of it. And so they're not going to be picking up the expenses that you may have. You want to make sure that you are filing a Schedule C so it'll tie into the 1099s that you have to their records, and that you have the expenses that will be related to it if they're applicable for something like business type of income. So the IRS reminds taxpayers that many of these forms may be available online. When other options aren't available, taxpayers who haven't received a W-2 or Form 1099, there's a link to that here, should contact the employer, payor, or issuing agency directly to request the missing documents before filing their 2020 federal tax return. So if you haven't gotten it, they may be able to provide some of this documentation online. So you might be able to go to them and ask about it. Maybe there's an online option that they provide in order to do so. So obviously the W-2 would be coming from the employer. You can ask them about that. You would have to go to the employer, ask them about that and how you can get access to it. 1099s then, once again, would be issued by whoever's the issuer of the 1099. You want to make sure to go to them and see if there's any problems or issues with the issuance of the 1099, or if you can get the 1099 electronically in some format that way as well. This also applies to those who receive an incorrect W-2 or Form 1099. Now remember, if your W-2 or 1099 is not correct, then if you just say, hey, look, this thing isn't correct, I'm going to do my taxes correctly, even though the form is incorrect, and then send it into the IRS is going to say, hey, something doesn't line up because the W-2 or 1099 sent to me by the payer, either the employer or whoever sent out the 1099 to you and the IRS, is not matching up. It will not line up once again. So what you would like to do to fix that problem, to minimize the pain in the future of the lag that's going to happen to correct this kind of problem, is to go to the person that issued the documentation. You got to go to the person that issued the W-2, which should be the employer. Hopefully the employers and the W-2s are on track. It might be more likely that the issuer of, say, a 1099 is not correct or something like that. And then once again, you got to go to the issuer of the 1099 if that were the case, because you would like them to adjust or fix the 1099, not so much so that you can fill out your tax returns correctly, because you may know what it should be, but so that when they send it to the IRS, when you send in your tax return, it matches the documentation that they have on record from the payers, like the employers and the issuers of the 1099. So you got to make those corrections there. If there's something that you need to correct, it can be kind of a problem or a pain to do so. But like I said, you want to go back to the issuer of the form whenever possible, because that'll make the process of processing the return a lot easier. So those who don't get a response are unable to reach the employer, payer, issuing agency, or cannot otherwise get copies or corrected copies of their Form W-2 or 1099 must still file their tax return on time by April 15th deadline or October 15th if requesting an extension. So they may need to use Form 4852, substitute for Form W-2 wage and tax statement. There's a link to that here, or Form 1099-R, distributions from pension, annuities, retirement, or profit-sharing plans, IRAs, insurance contracts, etc. There's a link to that here, to avoid filing an incomplete or amended return. If the taxpayer doesn't receive the missing or corrected form in time to file their tax return by April deadline, they may estimate the wages or payments made to them, as well as any tax withholdings. So if you can't fix it, like you can't get the 1099 that you need, you still need to file the tax return, which is typically going to be on April 15th. Unless you file an extension, you could file the extension. If you do not, the obligation for you to file the tax return is not waived due to the fact of one of these documents being incorrect. So you still got to push forward with it in some way, shape, or form. And then you want to fill out your tax return as best you can with the proper documentation on it, noting that, of course, if you try to fill it out with what you believe is your best estimate of what is proper and it doesn't match what's on the 1099 or W-2 issued to you and the IRS, you're probably going to have to deal with it in the future. You'll probably get more responses about it, and you'll have to push forward with it from that point forward. So first option, try to fix it from the employer side of things or the issuer of the 1099. If not, then you got to do your best estimate, file the tax return with what you believe is your best estimate, knowing that the IRS is not going to be able to tie that out possibly to what they have on their records, because they have the same issue or the same documentation, and then you're probably going to have to go from there. If there's any adjustments to it, you might get notifications from that point going forward. And then if you have to amend the tax return later, or if there's a suggested process as the IRS then works through it, or if you get contact with the employer or issuer, then you can go from there. So use Form 4852 to report this information on their federal tax return. If the taxpayer receives the missing or corrected Form W-2 or Form 1099-R after filing their return and the information differs from their previous estimate, they must file Form 1040-X amended U.S. individual income tax return. So in other words, if you don't get the documentation, you say, hey, the 1099 or W-2 is wrong. I tried to contact the employer. I couldn't. So I made my best estimate of what I believe is correct, and I issued it. And then the employer gave me the adjusted W-2, or someone gave me the adjusted 1099. That doesn't exactly tie out to the estimate that I had, because I didn't have the information needed. I just gave my best guess. Then you're going to have to estimate the tax return, or you're going to have to amend the tax return at that point. The amended tax return is for the Form 1040-X. It's called a Form 1040-X, amended U.S. individual income tax return. I believe you can do it electronically now. You used to have to do it by paper, but I think you can do it electronically now. For additional information on filing an amended return, see topic number 308. There's a link to that here. And should I file an amended return? There's a link to that here. Taxpayers should allow enough time for tax records to arrive in the mail before filing their 2020 return. So many people, if you're getting a refund or something like that, you'd be trying to jump on this really early to file your tax return. But just remember that it'll save time if you have all the tax documentation first and then file the return. Because if you do file the return and you're missing documentation such as a 1099 or W-2, it could delay the process. And if you're trying to get the refund fast, then what could delay the process is if the IRS has some 1099 or documentation or whatnot that you didn't include on the return because you didn't have it, and if they have to go through the process of amending that or making some type of adjustment, that could delay the refund. So you want to make sure you got all the documentation. In a normal year, most taxpayers should have received income documents near the end of January, including Form W-2 wage and tax statement, Form 1099 miscellaneous income, Form 1099 INT interest income from like a bank or something like that, Form 1099 NEC, this is the new one, non-employee compensation. So if you have a Schedule C type of business in prior years, you might have gotten a 1099 miscellaneous, but you might be getting a 1099 NEC this time. And then the Form 1099G, certain government payments like unemployment compensation or state tax refunds. So remember, many more people probably this year are getting a 1099G, not only for the refund from the state, but also for unemployment benefits. If you got unemployment benefits, you're typically going to have to include that in income as well to do so, or you should get, in order to help you do so, a 1099G from the state. So incorrect Form 1099G for unemployment benefits. Millions of Americans receive unemployment compensation in 2020, many of them for the first time. This compensation is taxable and must be included as gross income on their tax return. So taxpayers who receive an incorrect Form 1099G unemployment benefits they did not receive should contact the issuing state agency to request a revised Form 1099G showing they did not receive these benefits. So same kind of issue with the 1099s. If you get a 1099 from the state, which is wrong, which may have happened this year because somebody may have, there's more identity theft that could be happening this year due to the problems that are going on and people taking advantage of them. So they might try to get the unemployment benefit for somebody that didn't file with identity theft or something like that, which could result then in a 1099G being issued to somebody who didn't get the payments, possibly for the unemployment. So if that situation happens, or if it's just wrong for whatever reason, just like the other 1099s, if you got a 1099 for unemployment and it's wrong, you're like, I didn't get any unemployment, or it's wrong for whatever reason. Once again, you got to go back to the issuer of the 1099, or you really would like to. That's the first step to go to see if they can amend the 1099, because that 1099, once again, went to the IRS. And if you file your tax return with a different number than is on the 1099, the IRS could slow things up and have a problem. You'd really like to fix it at the point in time where the 1099 was issued, in this case, that being the state. So taxpayers who are unable to obtain a timely corrected form, states should still file an accurate tax return reporting only the income they received. So if you can't get it fixed, once again, you file the tax return, you make your best guess, you do your best estimate on what the income should be, even if the 1099 is wrong, right? You base it on what you believe it should be, and then you're going to have to continue on to make any adjustments that might need to be made in going forward in the future, possibly getting contacted by the IRS asking about it because the 1099 will not line up, or possibly you finally get a response from the state that will be talking about it at that point. So use irs.gov. IRS tax help is available 24 hours a day on irs.gov, irs.gov, the IRS website, the official IRS website, where people can find answers to tax questions and resolve tax issues online. The Let Us Help You page, there's a link to that here, helps answer most tax questions, and the IRS service guide, there's a link to that here, links to other important IRS services.